These paddles were so popular that the company's website was review bombed after some shapes sold out in less than 5 minutes. And after playtesting these paddles for several hours now, I'm not going to justify the behavior, but I'm starting to understand why people went so crazy. So let's talk about it. First, as a disclosure, I had no obligation to do this review, and there is no input from 11SIX24 on the thoughts I'm going to provide. If you do use my affiliate link in the description, it provides you 10% off these paddles, which go live for a second round pre-order on February 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And I do receive a small kickback from the use of that link, which goes a very long way to improving the channel. First and foremost, let's do a quick spec check. Here are the specs for the whole lineup, and the first thing to note is that these are definitely power paddles. The Hurache-X power nearly breaks the top 10% in terms of power of all paddles that I've hit, but in general across the whole lineup, they fall behind the old guard of super powerful paddles like the Gearbox Pros and the Yola Mods, but they still outperform the new guard of more popular power paddles like the PaddleTech Bantams and the Carbon True Foams. The Vapor and Pegasus paddles come in 11SIX24's currently proprietary shapes, and the other overarching trends to notice here are that these are all very high spinning paddles, and they also all have handle lengths that, while varying between the three, are all definitely sufficient enough for two-handed backhands. Here's a couple of other trends you might find interesting. So there's a positive correlation between the paddles getting longer and having more power, meaning that the wide body Pegasus is the least powerful and the elongated Hurache-X is the most. But once you see that the same trend follows for swing weight and balance point, that becomes a little bit less surprising. But here's a trend that might actually be interesting. There's an exact opposite relationship for pop, with the Hurache-X being the least poppy and the Pegasus being the most. Now, I'm not too sure why that relationship exists. It could be due to the face layup, where if the layers are a bit more unidirectional, the shorter the paddle gets, the shorter the fibers are, so the ball exits off faster, but not necessarily harder. But that's just a theory. When it comes to the on-court playability of these paddles, it's honestly pretty striking. These paddles have a plushness to them, which not only translates to a sweet spot that feels very forgiving, particularly pronounced on the Pegasus, but also contributes to the high spin rate, as these paddles are not overly reliant on grit. The foam-injected walls of this paddle also aren't particularly good at vibration dampening, which in my opinion facilitates the control and accuracy side of the game because the plushness of ball feel really translates down the handle to your hand, so you feel the responsiveness of how you've hit the ball. This is in stark contrast to Gen 2 paddles with really firm anti-vibration foam-injected walls, as well as fully foamed core paddles such as the Gen 4 True Foams and Selkirk Lab 008s. Now, I've avoided talking about the construction of this paddle for a reason, and it's because I believe it's at least 85% of the reason why people went crazy for them. So I cut open my Pegasus paddle, and this is what I found. Right off the bat, I noticed two things. The foam in the sides of these paddles is extremely soft, and the core itself is completely floating. It is not attached to the edge wall foam at all. The lack of density in the foam not only confirms that it's not purely made for vibration dampening, but also confirms why the paddle feels so plush. Having the core separated away from the edge foam creates more of a trampoline effect, where striking the ball activates flexion of the rest of the core, whereas many other Gen 3 paddles are created so that only particular parts of the paddle are meant to flex where the ball is struck. You'll notice if I bend this slice that I took to over-exaggerate a ball strike, the individual cells of the core begin to separate away from each other. And this is what creates that feeling of the ball sinking into the face and coming off with so much velocity, which is in stark contrast to Gen 3 paddles constructed with more of a diving board effect so that it isolates which part of the paddle is actually flexing. I also didn't particularly feel any break-in with any of these paddles or really any change in playability, and this core construction explains a lot because the way that it is, nothing internally is really meant to change over time. My main concern with this paddle, as it is with all Gen 3 polypropylene-based cord paddles, is durability. We already saw diving board-based paddles crush in the exact areas meant to flex, and we have another floating core paddle on the market, the Honolulu J2K Plus. It's already communicated that that paddle is not going to last more than 3 months, most likely. So the question is whether or not these paddles are going to follow suit. The main argument against this after cutting the paddle open, though, is that the cells in the core do still look very healthy, and the walls of the cells look very thick, and this is after several hours of play testing, which I'm sure 11SIX24 has done this in an effort to combat the core crushing issue. And if you caught this earlier and you're wondering what the other 15-ish% of the reason people went into frenzy over these paddles is, it's the media-driven hype. I don't think it was a secret that the vast majority of reviewer community thought these paddles played really freaking well, and to be fully transparent, if I wasn't lucky enough to have gotten my hands on a Ripple R2 beta, which is still technically legal, I would probably main the Hurache-X. And in this case, I think these paddles fully lived up to the hype. And when there is consensus like this, that is very often the case, but not always. But with all that said, that covers everything you should know before making a decision on these paddles, which again, go on pre-sale for a round 2, either the day of or after you're seeing this video. So make sure you like, subscribe, comment down below whether or not you think these paddles are going to be worth the hype. And I hope you all stay happy and healthy, and of course, out on the courts. Until the next video. Peace.